God wants us to surrender all of us to Him,
Mhm.
regardless of which of those journeys we're on. Are we on a celibacy journey? Are we on a journey of not pursuing a potential mate because we're focusing on career or the current season or even caring for parents or whatever? Regardless of what the season is and the status that we are, can we surrender ourselves to the Lord to let Him mature us out of immaturity and mature us towards the person that He's calling us to be and that we
Yeah.
desire to be?
All right, here we are for this week's culture segment. We're welcoming back our dear friend, MT Wilson. MT, great to have you.
Hey, Lisa, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So this topic that we're going to talk about today, not that we haven't had about 1 billion listeners write in about this over the years, but recently another listener wrote in and they're asking a question that is really just kind of this version of, what do I do with my sexual desires as a 30 plus, maybe single person? Because I gave God my 20s. Okay, whatever. I didn't get married. I thought I gave him plenty of time to help me marry someone amazing. That didn't happen. So now I feel like all bets should be off. And so, MT, you are a licensed professional counselor. You are going to be forced to talk about this topic because you are also a certified sex therapist. So sorry that maybe someday we will have you talk about something unrelated to counseling topics and sex in particular. But today is not your day. Today you're
Understood.
talking about this wheelhouse of yours. So really, I mean, it's this idea of like, is it impossible for me to be single, like let's say in my 30s, could be even older than my 30s, with no dating prospects and not have sex? And young adults, even Christian young adults, are saying, isn't this an unrealistic expectation? And I would love, MT, for you to start off the conversation. You didn't get married until your late 30s. So not only do you have expertise as a counselor, but you actually walked this out in your own life. Tell us a little bit about your own story in light of this. Was this a frustrating journey for you? What did singleness look like for you? Did you have conversations around this with other single friends? Were you just like, I just got to make this happen, or whatever? What were your thoughts during that season?
I would say it was both frustrating and I was very content,
Mm.
both.
Mm-hmm.
Like probably most people in my teens and college years, I didn't think anything about it. In
Mm-hmm.
fact, I would say that in that season, I was saved of a lot of grief that I saw my friends going through because they were dating and, going through the breakups and things like that. And that just wasn't my experience. So I was focused on academics. I was focused on my degree. Even into my first couple of years of career, was very content. It was only when I went back, my own story, went back to graduate school at 25. And at 25, I went back to grad school, and some of the folks that were in grad school with me were married. And then some of them got married through my years of grad school. And so it was around that time that I started to really struggle just a little bit because I knew at some point I wanted to be married, but it was a theoretical desire.
Mm-hmm.
I was still focused on career and still focused on, things like that. So, but it was about that time that I started having the longing for wanting to be married.
Mm-hmm.
And then seeing people around me get married and start to have children and start to grow their families and whatnot. And at that point, it tapped into sort of my longing. And that's when it became more of a struggle for me. I was blessed to be able to focus on my career. In fact, there were a lot of privileges that I had as a result of being single. I wasn't tied down. I could travel to do speaking engagements. I could write, my first couple of manuscripts with other authors and things like that. So I enjoyed those periods, and yet that's when the longing started to set in for
Mm-hmm.
me.
Yeah.
So by the time I got to my 30s, early 30s, of course, I was dealing with my own issues of pornography as well. So, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
in my early 30s is when I really started working that through
Mm.
and finding accountability. We can talk about that at some point, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But it was also in that period where I realized I've got to start thinking as a person who really wants to be married someday. And I was just thinking as a single person. And so in my early 30s was when the maturing process really set in for me of I've got to start thinking differently as a marriage-minded person of what do I do to set myself up for that?
Hmm.
And so yeah.
Yeah, no, that's great. I think it seems like MT when we talk to Boundless listeners, especially those in their 20s and then 30s, and again, especially on the later end of that spectrum, it seems like in this, obviously is maybe a little bit like duh, of course, that there's the physical sexual desire that some people are just like, this is, I mean, obviously God gave this to me. What am I supposed to do with it? And just the feelings around that, the emotions, the actual physiological implications. And then there's also the partner to that is just straight up, for lack of a better way of saying it, just kind of FOMO of like, this is not,
Mhm.
I want to be married and I want to have a healthy sexual relationship. So it's not like people in our audience are like, the one thing I want to be is, sexually incongruous and I want to sin just straight up.
Right.
They want God's design for this. They just don't understand why it's happening now. They want all the good things that come with marriage and with this kind of covenant in this relationship. So talk to us a little bit, if you had one of our Boundless listeners in the chair in front of you in a session, MT, what would you say to them to just help them start processing this about, the elements of it of, has God abandoned me? I can barely do my job or be in social settings with the opposite sex without, what do I do with this? Am I a freak for even
Yeah.
feelings, sexual urges, and not knowing what outlet there is for them?
Yeah, no, definitely not a freak. In fact, God placed that desire and longing for sex and marriage and all of that. I mean, it goes all the way back to the first chapter of Genesis. Be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it. It is the calling that most of us have, except for those who are called to celibacy, and that's a high calling as well. But this calling of participating in this co-creative process that God made us for, that we have this longing for something that's already but not yet. We have this desire, and yet we have this desire to put it in its right place, to experience it in the setting that God designed for it to be a safe expression that brings life and not death. Um, and so to long for that in settings where you're interacting with people when you're don't see any prospects or whatever is normal. And that's where we need community of people where we can really be honest with each other about what we're feeling and what our values are. Because really, success in life, I have learned, is more about how do we pursue choices that are consistent with our values. Having clarity about what our values are.
Hmm.
I want to be married someday. I want to be in that relationship with that one flesh union with someone and to live that out and knowing that my desires are disordered because of the fall. I desire things, and of course, the culture just screams out other values. That my goal is to be able to stay focused on that time, and between where I am and that time in the future, I've got to have people that will help me to encourage me to stay focused on my values
Hmm.
and living those out. But temptations are everywhere, struggles are everywhere, believing lies are everywhere.
Yeah.
And so it's just hard. And we need to do that in community. We need to work that through in community.
So you're saying, I mean, you're kind of saying this idea of if a Christian, again, because a lot of their peers, like say their 30 something peers, who are maybe living with their boyfriend or girlfriend or whatever, they're just kind of like, whatever, I'm going to do whatever I want.
That's
So
right.
I feel like a lot of time Christian young adults think the only way for me to do this is to literally white knuckle my way through. And we saw this come out in some ways through the purity culture of the 90s
Sure.
and beyond. And
Sure.
it was almost a wrong, positioning of what God's vision for sexuality is and how we live that out and him
Sure.
empowering us. So
Well
what
intended.
yeah, 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 well intended. But talk to us a little bit about this concept of how do you know if you're moving from just the white knuckling and a very maybe legalistically based assumption of just all I need to do is not do it before marriage and then God will
Right.
reward me by giving me a great, spouse, sexual partner, whatever.
Right.
How do we know that's unhealthy and that we're moving more to a place of health?
Yeah, good question. There's a couple thoughts I have about that. First of all, again, when you're when I was in my 20s, I didn't know what I didn't know.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, 50s looking back, there's a lot more that I know. But if I could go back and talk to my 20 something self or my 30 something self, I wouldn't know.
Mm-hmm.
I just wouldn't know.
Mm-hmm.
It's not about not doing it.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I thought when I was younger. It's not about not doing it. It's really about maturing out of
Mm-hmm.
and maturing into. Okay. So, for example, white knuckling, you mentioned that. White knuckling is really a self effort.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. It's a self effort that says if I can just physically restrain myself and if I can just think right thoughts, then I'll be okay.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, there's some truth to that, but what it misses is the emotional and spiritual piece of that journey. And I think if we could really, we think about, just even think about the language. Okay, I'm saving myself for marriage. I'm saving myself for my marriage partner. I'm saving myself. That's different than I'm surrendering
Yeah.
myself,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? I want to surrender myself to the Lord.
Mm-hmm.
I want to surrender myself for that future season, where I want to live out my values in that marital relationship.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just physical and mental, it's emotional and spiritual. And in fact, if I can focus on the emotional longing and the spiritual desire to partner with what the Lord is up to, and I can surrender that
Mm-hmm.
to the Lord. And part of that surrender is, again, working this out in community because there's the image of God in all the people that I'm connecting with is a part of this process. If I can learn to surrender that and mature into that space, it will eventually also help me with the physical and the mental part.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if I'm just saying it's my job just to gut it through and not do this thing, then I'm totally bypassing the emotional spiritual.
Yeah.
Versus if I can be honest with myself and with God and with some others in my community about the longings that I have, the struggles that I have, the failures that I have, and all of that,
Yeah.
and see this as a maturing out of my immaturity and a maturing into, right,
Mm-hmm.
where I'm going.
Mm-hmm.
It will take care of the physical part as well. I had a mentor one time that had a little plaque on his bookshelf, and it said, God doesn't heal immaturity. He calls us to grow up.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not a pejorative statement or punitive statement. It's a statement that says this is what God intends, that sanctification, this thing we talk about in our religious circles, applies here.
Yeah.
That there's an immaturity in me about how I have pursued these things that I need to surrender to the Lord so that he can remake me from the inside out, so that I live this thing from the inside out rather than trying to knuckle it down from the outside in.
Well, it's actually very empowering because the idea that if you're supposed to get somewhere, you're immature now, it implies that there is a destination that you can get to, which is maturity.
Yes.
You're not stuck
Yes.
where you are. Everyone has
Yes.
that available to them. And I think of that in terms of what you were saying about white knuckling, because we use that phrase or we use that term so often in terms of sexual integrity or, what you said, saving sex for marriage. We don't often apply it to other sinful patterns. Like we're not usually white knuckling our food addictions or our wanting to lie about something. We just lie and then we figure, well, let the chips fall where they may. So it almost is weirdly like categorizing certain sins, like, well, this one's too much, this one's too difficult, and the others, it's just we'll figure it out in the end. So I appreciate
Well, and interestingly enough, you bring that up, Lisa, food and sex are probably more similar than any other things that we may struggle with, like alcohol or drugs or whatever, because we know without eating, we die.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Now, we don't die without sex, but we cease to be human when we pretend like we're not sexual beings.
Right. Yeah.
We are sexual beings, and part of our sexuality is expressed in relationship with God, relationship with others, and often those friendships that we pursue in relationships bring along the potential mate in those spaces. So when we try to just white knuckle it, which, is this guy sitting in his chair, not drinking alcohol, looking at the liquor cabinet, right? That's the white knuckling idea. Like, to pretend like we're not sexual beings in that situation is just detrimental to our soul.
Yeah. So this is another concept that a lot of people, I feel like even a lot of Christians find kind of controversial. And that's when Christian leaders say, hey, the desire to have sex and sexual longing is actually a good motivator for marriage. And then some people act like, oh, that's not very spiritual, or that's not very triumphant in the way we live the Christian life. But practically speaking, there's a reason why we have sexual desire. There's a reason why God created marriage, including, procreation and a number, the things that come part and parcel with that. So talk to that a little bit about the freedom to pursue marriage and sex being one of the reasons that actually is okay for believers and the freedom in pursuing that.
Sure. And this goes back to what I said from the very beginning in the book of Genesis, that this is something that God told our first parents
Hmm.
to do.
Hmm.
Be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, subdue it.
Hmm.
It is the calling of most. Again, there's a specialized calling for some folks that feel like that they're supposed to be single to dedicate themselves to the Lord and to ministry, and that's perfectly fine.
Hmm.
But most of the rest of us are marriage minded,
Hmm.
so to speak.
Yeah.
And so it recognizes there is a longing, there is a desire inside of us for that.
Hmm.
And again, it's a fallen world, and we don't get to control all the variables. In fact, most of the variables we don't control.
Hmm.
And yet we believe that we have a good Heavenly Father who wants to give good gifts to his kids.
Yeah.
Yes, we don't understand all the details. Yes, there is fallenness that implicates us in that and makes it very difficult of a journey. But God wants us to surrender all of us to him,
Hmm.
regardless of which of those journeys we're on. Are we on a celibacy journey? Are we on a journey of not pursuing a potential mate because we're focusing on career or the current season or even caring for parents or whatever? And then the season that we're open to finding someone, but we don't see any prospects close by, or that we are dating someone or we're engaged. Regardless of what the season is and the status that we are, can we surrender ourselves to the Lord to let him mature us out of immaturity and mature us towards the person that he's calling us to be and that we
Yeah.
desire to be?
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
and the sexual desire is a part of that.
Right. So kind of tell us here, MT, again, I always envision you when I ask this of like you sitting down with a young adult as though you were counseling them. I think we would have to admit, this is not the 19th, even the 20th century. We are living in 2025 where there are any number of things that are going to, and straight up Satan himself, trip us up in this area. You already alluded to pornography. Talk about
Sure.
if you were going to if you were going to talk to a young adult about here is what I would say to you to not literally shoot yourself in the foot when it comes to pursuing sexual integrity in your relationships. What advice would you give them?
So it starts with the theoretical.
Hmm.
Okay, regardless of the fact 100 years ago versus today, we deal with three main enemies: the world, the flesh, and the devil. They've been around since the beginning, and we still have them, right? 2025.
Yep.
The world is a very fallen place and getting more fallen by the day.
Hmm.
So we have to be honest about that. Our flesh is just as fallen now as it always has been. Okay, we just have different detractors, things that distract us in this day and age, which I can talk about in a minute. And Satan has always been there.
Hmm.
And so these are the things that we always have been dealing with, and we're still dealing with. Now, the culture, way more broken than it used to be.
Hmm.
The portals that we struggle with, you think about it, and you go back a number of decades, and you think about the television,
Hmm.
and then you think about the advent of the internet, and then pocket phones, and then social media. Oh my gosh, social media.
Yeah.
And then you think AR, and now we've got AI,
Hmm.
right? And of course, pornography has been a part of all of that.
Hmm.
But these things, it's not just the pornography, it's the messages that we are bombarded with. Our soul was not intended
Hmm.
for such hostility.
Hmm.
And yet we're dealing with it all the more in 2025.
Hmm.
And who knows what 2030 looks like, but it's going to be worse than what it is now,
Sure.
because that's the progression.
Yeah.
So again, it goes back to the simple things that we've always taught Christians to do: surrender to the Lord, stay consistent in your prayer life, stay in the Word, stay in community, be honest in a small community of what's really going on in your world so they can be there to support you, not just with your struggles, but what your desires are.
Hmm. That's
And
good.
be honest about those things and let them be there to support you.
Yeah. I think it's so true too. And I know a lot of my guy friends have told me this that about, that being about something bigger than themselves is so motivating toward the minute we start looking inward and the minute we start just self-soothing or self-gratifying or and pornography and everything, sexual sin, technology plays into that. It's so great to be able to, in the best sense of the word, busy ourselves with things that are lasting, things that are life-giving, things that are about others, about the kingdom. And that's where you said, community comes into play. It's so important for us to have others who are spurring us on to reach higher and to be about bigger things that ultimately push back the effects of the fall, as it were. That's pretty great.
For sure.
So,
And I honestly think that's one of the beautiful things about Boundless
yeah,
is that what you guys have created is a community that supports one another in so many different ways, um, for marriage-minded single adults, and this is just one more aspect of community.
that's fun. Well, MT, this is always a great conversation when we can have it, and it's never enough time. So, but hopefully, folks will get a little vision with what we've been talking about here today for the fact that God is in our stories, God is in our struggles. He is going to walk us forward. We need to cling to Christian community in order to do this. No lone rangers allowed. And you know what? Straight up, some of us might need a little extra help. And that's why MT and other counselors who have been involved with Focus on the Family and elsewhere are such a great resource as well to give you kind of that vision and that helping hand for what care might look like for you and even next steps. So we're also going to offer a link in our show notes to our counseling department. So there is a network through Focus on the Family and our counseling division, a network of referrals across the country right in your area that might get you, like I said, just that next step, that encouragement to pursue this in your own life. And so you will find all the information there, or you can just straight up go to boundless.org/counseling. MT, thank you again. It's always our privilege to talk with you, and hopefully we will do it again.
Love to.
Thanks so much, sir.
Certainly.